I guess I'll just get right to it. I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, who has really quite an amazing history here. He's really essentially defined digital experiences through his career, and he continues to innovate and introduce new thinking and new ideas that I think we all need to be paying attention to. Back in 1982, he founded Electronic Arts. Now it's a $10.5 billion behemoth. So I think we all know about Electronic Arts. About a decade later, in 1993, he introduced a very advanced game console called 3DO. And that he didn't stop there. He got into mobile gaming and mobile experiences through Digital Chocolate 10 years after that. And you know, that was 4 years before the iPhone came out, and yet he was serving up literally billions of play experiences, 200 million different downloads, different mobile apps. And now here in 2013, he's introduced something I think is really super important when we think about education. Often we talk about science and technology, engineering, the arts and mathematics, but we fail to really begin thinking about the folks behind that, the students and even the adults that are trying to learn, and their emotional intelligence. What Trip has done with his company, IF, is to think about that and how to measure that and how to ensure that we're raising wholesome people that are really kind of cognitively aware of those that are around them and that can work well in teams and other things. But I'll leave that up to Trip to share more about what he's doing with you. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to Trip Hawkins.
Good morning, everyone. I'll just point out that, first of all, how many of you are from around here? Okay, well, the rest of the country is rooting for the Kansas City Royals, so to screw that, you know, go Giants. And I just love it when they make the playoffs because, you know, they're orange and black, and they just fit right into the Halloween theme, and the colors in October are fabulous. Isn't it awesome? We got this great weather, but dang it, we don't like this weather anymore because it's not raining. Consider the irony. Anyway, I want to tell you a little bit about, you know, my personal journey as it relates to what I'm doing here. I think in many respects, you know, what we're all doing in our lives is trying to figure ourselves out, and it's kind of a quest for our own identity. And if you think about this whole idea of emotional intelligence, it's not something that we really had to think about as a species, you know, until maybe 100 or 200 years ago, because we were all growing up in a tribe. And as a child, you spend every day, all day long with your parents and with tribal elders, and everybody's role modeling. And honestly, citizenship was pretty simple. The issues of character were pretty simple, and you were accountable to everybody in your tribe all the time. And everything got explained to you right from the get-go. And you were going to religious services together and so on, and it just all worked. Well, you fast forward, you look at the last 100 years in particular, people are not growing up alongside their parents. Their parents are at work, or they're missing. They're in these big public schools, and you know, we're in an urban environment that's urban, it's industrial, it's technology-based. Big public schools, and we've crammed every ethnic and religious group in together. Nobody's even going to religious services anymore. It's changed quite a bit in a short period of time. And that was just one of the things that I had to come to grips with, was to realize that I didn't have emotional intelligence. And it's because my parents didn't have it, and my grandparents didn't have it. And we were a freaking disaster. And I started to realize that, nobody really has these skills, because, well, where would you get them? They're not taught in school, and they don't happen the way they used to happen. And of course, the reason they weren't taught in school is they were all caught up with it being about ethnicity or about religion. Well, there's a crying need for it, and the way I began to experience it was that just completely coincidentally, I have 4 kids, and they all started going to a school called the Nueva School, which is one of the pioneering schools in this field. They're one of the places where it kind of got invented. In fact, they are the featured school in the famous book from 20 years ago called Emotional Intelligence. They're the featured teaching school. So I started having kids in that school, and I would attend the parent-teacher nights and find out what my kids were doing, and I learned about this curriculum. That, wow, that's the most mind-boggling thing I've ever seen. How come nobody ever taught me this stuff? You know, why don't other schools do this? and you talk to other parents in other schools, and you realize, yeah, they're not doing it. And say, this is ridiculous. This really needs to be at scale. This needs to be out there. Everybody's got to have this. Well, this is going on again in the context of even having my kids, by the time they're 8 or 9 years old, starting to correct me about my behavior on a regular basis. So that was kind of humbling. And beginning to notice other social problems like global warming, and just wondering, when our generation is gone, what kind of state is the planet going to be in, and how embarrassing is that going to be for us as a generation if we don't turn the tide on some of these issues. And I started channeling something, just in my own words, something that I later realized that Frederick Douglass said over 100 years ago, that it is easier to build strong children than it is to fix broken men. And yeah, sure, I'm a broken man. I need these skills. We all need these skills. But it's probably a little bit late to shift all the adults from the materialistic value system that is wrecking everything. It's funny because in the last 10 years there's been a lot of research that's found that materialism, increased wealth, does not make people happy. And of course, between the 99% and the 1%, all the 99% says, well, I tell you what, let me have some for a while and I'll tell you what I think about that. I like to try that for myself. I know it from firsthand experience. And this is something that we've really got to change, because it is the direct cause of pervasive global poverty, global warming, pollution, etc. And the only shot we have is if we do change the values of the kids. So that ultimately was my motivation in getting into this. But then if you extend it a little bit further, and I'm an entertainment guy. I spent my whole career making entertainment products, but always doing it because of a fundamental belief that when we interact, we learn. We learn by doing. And it's something that I sensed as a kid when I was playing, particularly when I was playing games, particularly when I was playing a game that was trying to simulate something more complex and deep and real and authentic. And I'm talking about things like Dungeons and Dragons, where, yeah, dragons aren't real, but when you have a group of game players playing in a gaming world like that, dealing with the resource management and strategy and tactics of how to deal with a creature like a dragon and having conversations, there's a whole lot of adult decision-making and learning power that kids can tap into in powerful fantasies like that. So even as a kid, I realized, yeah, this is a really important form of learning, but I always applied it to entertainment applications. And did that knowing that there's learning value there. But that's not the same thing as targeting education, because when you target education, you've got to have government-supported curriculum, because that's where the financial support is, and that's where the public is going to respond. So when the government says, oh yeah, we're going to have Common Core, we're going to have math be first, and we're going to have a math SAT, well, pretty soon, you may not be aware of this, but the global market for private tutors, which is number one about math, which is about getting your kid into college and doing well on the SAT, that market is approaching $150 billion a year in size. So that's how much money that the private sector, consumers, have to fund because of what they consider to be a deficit about the schools in terms of their ability to satisfactorily teach math to help their kid get into college. So that shows you the power of the consumer market if they decide there's a problem that they want to solve. And that's another way to create leverage. But if you're not focused on what the government cares about, that's a problem. So you've got to look at the curriculum the government cares about. And then you've got to have a legitimate way of assessing whether or not learning has occurred, and whether or not the knowledge of that learning is going to transfer into application in the real world. So in the game industry, we've always had these charming examples like SimCity, where everybody knew that there's a whole lot of mental stuff going on when you play SimCity, but it never had curriculum per se, and it never had assessment. Of course, just in the last year, GlassLab put out SimCity EDU that does in fact have those things. But examples like this of really fabulous gameplay that's really engaging and fun, combined with government-sponsored curriculum, combined with legitimate assessment, they've been kind of a rarity. But there's now an opportunity, I think, to build out a whole industry of products like this for both consumer markets and for school markets. And there's a crying need. And it's funny, you look at all the money that gets spent here in America on schools, and it still doesn't work. Here in San Francisco, 3 kids start high school in public high schools, and one of them's not going to finish. And there's a bunch of kids that didn't make it to high school. This is San Francisco. I mean, you got a country pouring all this money in education, and almost half of the kids aren't finishing high school? Wow. So it's time to do something about this. It's time to bring the power of technology and the insight that many of us have learned from decades of crafting games and using game technologies, and bring that into these areas of need. So basically, we developed this learning model, and again, it's a learning model that I think a lot of companies could follow. And that's kind of what I'm suggesting here, is that over the next 10 years, we need to build an industry to bring out a whole lot of products that operate by these rules. And rule number 1 is recognizing that, hey, everybody, all these kids now, they're digital natives. This is the medium in which they're growing up, and it's their reference point, and it's where they're bringing their attention. And increasingly, the platform they're going to have is going to be a tablet. Of course, today, maybe just borrowing a parent's phone or having their own, iPod Touch type device. Increasingly, the tablets are going to take over. There's going to be 1 billion tablets within a couple of years. And what you want to do is create a set of applications where an adult, whether it's a parent or a teacher, feels like they can curate what's on those tablets. Whereas today, a lot of junk gets on those tablets, and there's a lot of time being spent by kids that the parents and teachers realize is not productive time. And with all respect to a game like Angry Birds, you do, in fact, learn in Angry Birds, and you develop skill in Angry Birds, but it's only applicable to getting a higher score in Angry Birds. So that's the problem, is if you're a parent, you can tell that addiction has developed because we're addicted, and the kids are addicted. My youngest kid just got his first phone, and it's just pretty hilarious watching a kid deal with texting for the first time. And he literally feels like, okay, I just sent this text, and now I gotta wait. But I gotta wait and see what they're gonna do. I mean, there's this expectation that everything's gonna be immediate, and that you have this obligation to reply immediately to anybody that is gonna contact you. I was trying to explain to him, no, we don't have to, be completely preoccupied by these things. But they are. I mean, the kids are getting addicted to this stuff. It's a serious, serious problem. And I'll just give you one little insight about it. Let's take 2-year-olds. Developmentally, there's a lot of things that people do around 2-year-olds that are inappropriate, like taking them to baseball games where they can't understand or process all the noise. But they sit around the dining table, and a 2-year-old is learning and developing and forming new neurotransmitter connections based on observing how the grown-ups and the older kids are interacting socially. Well, what do they see now? They see everybody looking at a device. I mean, that's crippling for that 2-year-old. So this is stuff that we're just beginning to notice, that we have these issues. So we want to get a whole lot more wholesome content out there and really allow the grown-ups to curate what the kids can do. But of course, the kids have to want to do it. So that's why you need the game to be the foundation. And it's got to be really elite, first-class gameplay. Otherwise, the kids won't keep doing it. There's an enormous difference between what they perceive as play or work, and it's got to feel like play. And then it's got to have these other steps with the curriculum and the assessment, as I mentioned. So, when you think about how to do this, you can start with, well, we got these computers, what do they do well? I mean, they're very good at simulating things. They can manage a whole bunch of complex scenery. We can now drop you in and immerse you in an environment that feels very real in 3D, where you achieve suspension of disbelief pretty easily. And we can give you any kind of fantasy you want. And of course, that can be a fantasy about doing something like flying an actual airplane, which you may then later decide you want to go to an airport and do, and then you may decide that you want to become a pilot. I don't think there's any young pilots today that didn't start out flying things on a computer, flying things in a video game. That's where that starts now. Of course, even the profession of being a pilot, they're constantly looping back to computer simulators and doing training work on an obligatory basis. It's very effective. But then you can take it into the realm of fantasy. I can fly all the World War I planes. I can fly imaginary spaceships from the future. I can do all kinds of really powerful stuff that is really motivating and exciting to do because I get to be a bigger hero. And being a hero, this is a really important thing. You know, you guys have all heard about the Joseph Campbell Monomyth and how he figured out that, wow, everybody for thousands of years has been telling the same stories with the same plot elements. But I think there's even more to it than that. I think we underestimate the power of narrative in our daily lives. But I'm just going to sketch it out to you, and you're going to be thinking about this and nodding your heads in agreement. That you've been programmed, and you may be unconscious about this or conscious about this, but you've been programmed by a million years of ancestral voices. And those ancestral voices are basically saying to you, you are going to be the king or the queen in your kingdom. And of course, each of us has our own little unique little space that's our kingdom. And in order to become the king or the queen, you must first be the warrior, and then you must be the hero, then you must become the prince or the princess, find the other one, build the castle, have the kids, etc. So, you know, we hear about these things in other kind of cultural, secular forms. But that's the wiring that we have. And of course, then we can overlay it. So all of us grew up in a high school environment where who's the prince in the high school? The quarterback. Who's the princess? The homecoming queen, the head cheerleader, whatever. So there are sort of modern cultural overlays. But underneath it are these archetypes that are talking to us all the time through our ancestry. Of course, we see them most potently represented by our parents, who are the most important role models in our lives. And of course, we're obviously genetically related to them and everything that preceded them. So when you can get back into fantasy that lets you be a successful hero, it's ridiculously powerful. An example of how this power works is you'll notice that virtually every Hollywood film, as a fundamental theme, has the successful resolution of family dysfunction. Because we all come from dysfunctional families. We all hope desperately for that dysfunction to be resolved. It probably won't be. Maybe you can put a dent in it. Maybe you can improve it a little bit. But it's amazing how, even if it's totally patronizing, they'll cram that theme into a movie even where it doesn't belong. You know, and you'll have that little feel-good thing at the end where there's reconciliation and there's a new family formed or whatever. So fantasy is really important to people, and it's an essential way to learn. Carl Jung said that the best way to learn about yourself is to pretend to be other people. And again, with computer simulation of fantasy, we can just do that till the cows come home. And then, of course, we can tie into hormone release like the dopamine transmitters. We can do what-if scenarios, measure cause and effect. We can collect all this data. We can track all this stuff and make comparisons. And you can even adapt to the user. So this is all really cool stuff that we're just barely touching the potential of right now. So then let's shift to the piece of computers that I've spent most of my career, which is games. Why games? Why do this around games? Well, learning must start with the attention of the student. And where is their attention? It is here. It's on their device. So meet them there. And then you're not going to be able to get them to learn anything if you don't keep their attention and engage them, and that depends on their motivation. Well, what are they motivated to do right now on their device? They're motivated to win the game they're playing. Again, meet them there. And if you want to do this, it ties into the fundamental scientific nature of motivation, which is that motivation is at its most powerful when it is intrinsic, when you're doing it for your own reasons of your own nature, when it's autonomous, when you feel like you've got harmony with yourself and are making your own choice about it. So, you know, consider whether a kid wants to sit in a classroom paying attention to a lecture or play a game. The game could have a character giving the same lecture. It can be essential that if you don't pay attention to that, you're going to fail at the game. It's kind of obvious that the latter is going to work better. Okay, so then you have this division or difference between the tradition of what's going on in classrooms, the didactic learning style, and learning by doing. I mean, Marion Diamond, a scientist, brain scientist at Berkeley, she was the first one that proved scientifically that the single best way to increase human intelligence is through interaction. She proved that we learn by doing. Now, if you then tie that into a valid curriculum and you make an authentic experience where there's real choices, real actions, real results, and consequences. And then you let the child, the players, then reflect on what happened and conceptualize it. And then you're measuring everything in real time as you're going along. Yeah, you're very likely to end up getting the kind of transference that would be very potent. And then, as I was illustrating earlier with this power of narrative, you can leverage the power of story. Okay, well, Raymond Chandler said that a great story is something that happens to characters that you care about. So you want to start out with the bones of a story where there are characters that will promote some emotional attachment. I'm a big fan of doing that with what's called borrowed interest, meaning where do they already have an emotional attachment that you can build on? This is why Hollywood would much rather make a Spider-Man movie than invent some random new superhero, because they know that you already care about Spider-Man. But Hitchcock, when he made The Birds, he cast an unknown blonde actress in the lead because she'd been in these soap commercials, and everybody knew her from the soap commercials. And then to reinforce that point, in the opening shot of The Birds, they had her reenact the last 10 seconds of the ad to make sure you remembered who she was, because this is someone that therefore you cared about. And then the movie's off and running at that point. So case in point, in our game, it's themed about this conflict between dogs and cats. Well, everybody knows what dogs and cats are. Everybody's probably got some emotional connections with dogs and cats because they're the most popular pets in the world. And everybody knows that dogs and cats don't get along. And if you're going to teach social and emotional learning, then yeah, we're going to have to be dealing with interactions. And honestly, if we had human characters, we'd immediately get accused of racism no matter what we did. But with dogs and cats, we can do anything and get away with it. It's fantastic. And then, of course, you got to get them involved. And then you find that the interactive play is very potent for the learning and for the engagement, because it's kind of like they're inside a movie, and characters are talking to them, and they're acting out these movie scenes, but they have to make choices, and it requires attention for them to make those choices. So there's all kinds of good things going on. And again, there's scientific evidence that people remember information better when they've learned it through a story. And it probably, therefore, is engaging more parts of your brain, because there's not just logical, factual information, but also emotional information to integrate with it. All right, so I'm just going to let you read these statements. I'm just having a little fun with you. This is a pop quiz. Okay, anybody have any guess as to who said this? How recently do you think this was said?
Bill Gates.
It sounds like something very contemporary, doesn't it? It was said in the 1950s by Marshall McLuhan. Yeah, that guy always blew my mind. But it's really disappointing that he said this all that many years ago, and we've done so little about it. That's why it's time to do it now. So in terms of what we're doing, I've very much built on the same recipe that I'd used to create EA Sports, which is very different from a normal creative development and publishing process. So if you're working with a poet or a novelist or a painter, they're going to they want to invent their own thing. You know, they want to create their own game. Well, the EA Sports recipe doesn't work that way at all. If you're going to make NFL football, you've got to conform to the laws of physics, the NFL rule book. You've got to properly implement NFL plays that work correctly. You've got to have all the player stats in the game working correctly. And you have to basically do what you're told to do by a guy like John Madden. You know, so that takes a very different kind of developer. But you also you want them to be a really good developer. They've got to want to be part of this kind of a team process. But you get all these different participants in a team process. And if they're good, they're all good quality ingredients, and they all share the passion to make that authentic experience and the commitment to do whatever it takes to do it, then you've got a good formula, and it applies in this case. So to do this with emotional intelligence and social and emotional learning, one of these I did was I went back to that book from 20 years ago, the bestseller Emotional Intelligence. The featured school is the Nueva School. The featured research institution is Yale, and a bunch of the people from that book then formed this group called CASTLE, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. It's based in Chicago. Castle then proceeded to help convince the government of Illinois to pass the Illinois Mental Health Act 10 years ago and to form a committee to define the first government teaching standards for SEL. So these are the leaders in this field. So naturally, I brought them all into our project, and we're working exclusively with most of them. And then, of course, we've got great game developers. The guys that run our game studio had most recently built Moshi Monsters up to a customer base of 80 million kids. And then we, of course, build on the dog-cat theme, but also in terms of borrowed interest. The name of the company, If, you probably already figured this out, but it's taken from the poem by Rudyard Kipling, the poem that goes, "If you can keep your head while all about you are losing theirs, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same." It's a fabulous poem that Kipling wrote over 100 years ago to one of his kids about the character they wanted them to have. And I feel like, yeah, this is what we're making as a modern poem. Now, if you want to influence your kids, you don't write them a poem. You make them a game. Okay, so then of course we use the Joseph Campbell Monomyth, because why screw up a good thing if you're following that formula? It's pretty hard to screw up your story. And then we bring in these really polished and refined SEL lesson plans. Well, where did they come from? And it's kind of ironic because this group of Nueva teachers led by Janice Tobin, and Janice had taught SEL teaching at Nueva for 30 years, and then she formed this group called the Institute for SEL. And they have a binder, a 3-ring binder full of SEL lesson plans for classroom use. And basically, we got access to that. And it reminded me of the fact that one day John Madden gave me a 3-ring binder that was the Oakland Raiders playbook. So here it is, kind of same technology of the 3-ring binder. And these lesson plans, just like the Oakland Raiders plays, they've been polished and refined over a period of decades. The ones that didn't work got kicked out. The ones that were good got polished and refined and improved, and this is stuff that is proven to really work. Now you've got the government teaching standards. We looked at, from an assessment standpoint, the most advanced ways of designing for assessment, including ECD, evidence-centered design. We collaborated with Stanford Research Institute on that. And again, we have a team that's very determined to do this authentically in the right way. So, this gives you a sense of our art direction. In theory, let's see. This is where I'm way above my pay grade. So I'm going to ask for some help. Help! Oh, there I couldn't seem to get this through. Whoops. Sorry about that. Does look like we're on the auditorium audio.
That's a good solution.
Is the educational game that builds social and emotional learning, teaching skills like collaboration and empathy for others.
Do you understand what the problem is?
Managing frustration
Shall we just give up?
and healthy decision making.
You'll be fine. Just hand it over.
Adventure across an exciting world. Explore amazing places. Fun new characters. And discover the power of social and emotional learning.
Okay, so that just gives you a little taste of the look and feel of the product. You can see, okay, now I don't know how to get back into the presentation.
Yeah, I posted without the caps though, and it's not showing up. I posted like 4 things. This is the strangest thing.
Awesome. Thank you.
What's going on?
Okay, so you got a sense of the look and feel of the game. So one thing you might be wondering is, why SEL now? Well, after that group, Castle, was formed, they started doing research on some of the early schools that had SEL teaching programs, and they could measure before and after. And they pretty quickly figured out that schools had a dramatic improvement in school climate, discipline issues, student functioning and well-being when they had SEL teaching. Then they found that there was about a 20% improvement in academic performance in schools that had SEL teaching. And these are all findings just from maybe the last 10 years. And the government only recently got involved in starting to define and publish teaching standards, so they're starting to back it up. You can now tie it to Common Core. And as of about 2 years ago, the federal government hadn't really done anything about SEL per se, but starting 2 years ago, they added it to Priority 3 for Race to the Top funding. So any school that's applying for that billion-dollar bucket of money to help reform education, if they have an SEL program element, they get bonus points on their application. So that happened a couple of years ago. A more recent event, just in the last year, is what's called the Core Waiver, which is 1 million students that are in 8 of the largest school districts in California, including LA. Those districts went to the Department of Education and said, hey, we cannot comply with the No Child Left Behind legislation, but please don't decertify us and defund us. Here's our proposal of cutting us some slack about Common Core compliance for the next few years, and we're going to introduce SEL teaching, and we want you to have 40% of our report card be based on how well we do that. And the federal government said yes. So I think you're going to see a lot more school districts and a lot more states in the next year or two follow that lead, because I'm sure there's a whole lot of school districts discovering they can't comply with the Common Core No Child Left Behind requirements. So this is an area that's just now coming into awareness and activity at the federal government level. So it's very timely. I thought I'd talk a little bit about the learning design, because again, this is just to give you an illustration, but I think these are fundamentally sound principles that could be applied in almost any game used to teach any kind of curriculum. So first of all, you have to figure out, well, what are we teaching? So for example, in chapter 1 of our game, the top half of the screen is referencing some of the lesson plans that are introduced from the binder. And then as part of the domain analysis, we looked at all of the known teaching standards, whether they're from the government, from public schools, from private schools, from academic researchers, etc. And then we boiled it down to the things that everybody cares about, and we cast those as what we call the Excel goals. And these are essentially the 20 most important topics in SEL that include essentially everything that anyone thinks is important. Like one of the things that you find everybody has on that list is empathy. Everybody has listening. Everybody has self-awareness of emotion. Certain things might have slightly higher or lower priority, but you want to make sure that your 20 major areas cover everything. So one example is decision-making as it relates to acceptance. One component part of that is forgiveness. So if we have a lesson where we're going to teach about forgiveness, we'll measure it against that variable. That variable that we call DA for decision making as it relates to acceptance. So this is just showing some of the lessons and some of the key measurements that we were making in the chapter. And basically everything that the student does is being measured. So if they walk past a piece of litter, that's a choice. If they pick up the litter, that's a better choice. If they dispose properly of the litter, that's a better choice. And if they start a recycling center, that's a much better choice. So there's a lot of choices they have that are kind of implicit in the environment. And then there's other cases like when they're in a conversation where they have explicit choices like this. So here's a scene where your sidekick character that was a gift from your mentor, U-Dog, has disappeared. And so you're a little embarrassed. You're being put on the spot by U-Dog. Like, hey, where's Kibble? What happened? And we have your character float up in the air. And we start talking about layers of feelings and how feelings can go up and down like an escalator. Every kid loves escalators. They know what they do. And now you float it up in the air, and that's kind of uncomfortable. Maybe you'd like to come down. So he's starting to talk about mindfulness, and he's going to go from there into a lesson about a breathing tool you can use to calm down. And he's going to periodically stop and present 3 choices of what you can say in response, say or do in response. And the correct choice here is the second one. It's acknowledging and giving kind of active listening feedback about what he's saying, and indicating that in fact we are listening. So, for example, if a character says to you, "You're in Greenberry," and then 5 minutes later another character says, "Where are we?" If you say Greenberry, then we know that you were listening. If you say ziggurat, then we know you were not listening. Ziggurat's the name of the planet. So that's maybe a simple example of measurement. There's much more subtle examples. But every one of these choices, we have to consider whether or not it's either a positive or a negative indicator against all 20 of those variables. So in each chapter, we're looking at literally thousands of variable measurements. And you get such frequency and repetition that way that you've got a really good basis for statistical validity about whether or not they're learning the material. This is a shot at the Nueva School with a bunch of kids fighting over the game. But it's been really, really popular. We have a lot of different constituencies that have given us very positive feedback about the game. You know, it's been reviewed over 1,000 times in the App Store, and the vast majority of the reviews are 5 stars out of 5. I want to talk a little about this game experience cycle, starting with the child playing the game at the top, because we then have this facility called the dashboard, where all of the data that we're collecting gets reported to the adult. So again, whether that's a parent or a teacher, and it's sort of a fundamental feature set that this whole category needs to have. And what we do with each chapter, and a chapter is designed to be completed in about a month. It's going to take a couple of hours, so it's not going to demand more than 30 to 45 minutes a week of student or family time. And over the course of a year, it's designed to teach as much curriculum in a year as the Nueva School would teach without you having to pay $35,000 to have your student in that school. So each chapter, we send to the dashboard an overview about what the chapter is about, the story, the curriculum lessons, the fundamental teaching that's going to be going on. Then there are 10 events during the chapter where we'll send a notification to the dashboard about what the child did and how you can engage with the child. So that scene that we saw, you might get, the adult might get a note that says, hey, your child just learned this breathing tool to calm down. Talk to them about what it's like when they get too excited, and see if they agree that the breathing can help them calm down. We actually have the human beings breathe with the character when we teach that. Okay, so then you can say, well, hey, do you think you could maybe think about breathing like that when you're fighting with your brother over a toy? So that's what you're trying to do, is figure out how to create moments where the teacher or the parent can connect with the child and reinforce the learning and start to apply it to their real lives, and keep that cycle going. Then when you get to the end of a chapter, you get a full report card. The kid doesn't even know they've been tested, which is nice. They're just playing the game and doing what they need to do. Of course, they'll know when they did something good or not so good, because they'll get feedback about it from the characters in the game that's contextual based on the consequences. But they don't really know they're being measured or tested. But we kick out this report about, well, how did we do on each of these 20 major areas of SEL skills? Okay, so again, we're finding a wide variety of constituents that are responding really well to this. Certainly our target was boys, girls, and parents, and we hear all kinds of positive things from all of the above, and it works with a wider age range than we thought. We made a very good decision to have professional voice actors voice the characters. So again, it feels more like an interactive movie, and it reinforces English language fluency, but it then opens up a wider age range. So younger kids can play it because we don't have to worry as much about their vocabulary and their reading skills. But then we make sure in the design that the look and feel and the story and the characters and the dialogue, it's not juvenile, it's not so corny or alienating that, say, an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old would want to chuck it overboard because their younger sibling has started to do it and it's not cool anymore. It's got a more universal and timeless look and feel to it. So we've actually been pleasantly surprised that it appeals to a pretty wide age range. We were originally thinking, 7 to 11, maybe 6 to 12, and it's clear that really young kids can do it, particularly if they have some support from a parent, the same way that a parent would read to a child. And teenagers love the game too, particularly the girls. I mean, teenage girls. This is a game about relationships and conversation and what's not to like. They think it's awesome. So also the professional community, teachers, therapists, doctors, and then areas of special need. And if you're somebody as a therapist or as a parent and you're dealing with a topic like autism, it's really exciting when new tools come along that are effective and are also tools that can be used independently by the child. So all kinds of interesting opportunity. Anyway, I'm just going to sum up, and I'd be happy to take a few questions depending on how much time we have left. But there's a potential here to grow a new industry. I would really be delighted to see if some of the innovations that we're introducing get adopted more widely and help spark over the next 10 years the growth of a new industry. I think there's a lot of potential to apply some of the principles that we're using to a wide variety of content, subject matter, curriculum. And there's a lot of promising trends, I think, over the next decade that are going to help support this kind of growth. Thanks very much.
So we're good on time, maybe some questions?
Yeah, so I'd be happy to take some questions.
So typically, first of all, thank you, that's great. Typically, as apps start to develop, you see them expand beyond the digital platform into other mediums, such as movies, TV, consumer products. How do you envision that rollout while also maintaining true to really just the educational tenet of this property?
Yeah, for us, okay, so the question was about, I guess, both product and brand rollout into other media forms.
Yeah.
So we started in the consumer market. Then for this, the next thing is to expand the device support. So we now have versions running on PC, Mac, and iPhone that haven't actually been released to the public yet. So we want to have much more device support because we started only on the iPad. And of course, you need some of that device support if you want to get into the school market. Of course, the school market is going to require a beefier features in some cases. And then the first, I think, piece of media extension is the supplemental material that you may need for, when a teacher wants to wrap, say, one of these chapters around a discussion, we can provide materials that would help support that. I think, beyond what you do to get into the school market, then there's the question of brand development. And if you've managed to develop a good brand with good characters, then it's got potential as ebooks, as paper books, for TV, for film, et cetera. Those, of course, take it takes more time to develop. I think Angry Birds certainly gives a vivid example of what happens when a successful game gets very aggressive about merchandising. I mean, wow! I mean, they chase down every nook and cranny of merchandising that's humanly possible. But generally, a lot of that crossover will occur after you've got a lot of users. Other questions?
Thank you so much. It was fascinating.
Thank you.
I'm wondering about, in terms of the evaluation that's embedded, have you thought at all about whether the lessons learned are translating, or how to measure whether they are translating to real-life behavior change?
Yes. So the question is, do we think that the lessons from playing the games transfer to real-life behavior change? So we've only really had the product out for a period of months, but we get a ton of feedback from our customers about that very thing. So even I'm kind of blown away by this because we introduced terminology like the layers of, we call it the peanut butter and jelly, the layers of feelings, or there's some slang that's used, like the escalator of feelings. And we hear from parents, even from chapter 1. And to us, chapter 1's pretty humble. It's a short chapter. It's an introduction. We want it to be suitable for anybody, no matter what knowledge they have. So it's got to treat everybody kind of like a first grader. So some people might feel like, oh, this is, there's not much here. But it's, it's where you got to start. It's like if I'm going to try to teach you math, I'm going to start by saying, let's do 2 + 2 on our fingers. And then if you're really quick, then we'll move on from there, But we hear from all these parents about how a kid is practicing daily mindfulness about their peanut butter and jelly and where they are in the escalator. I mean, just stuff even from chapter 1. And then, of course, the customers then move on to additional chapters. They give us even more feedback like that. So, yeah, there's just a ton of anecdotal evidence that it really works. I also find it valuable when you get serious professionals to look at it. Because we had a bunch of serious professionals make this. I'm a spokesperson here, but I'm not the curriculum expert. I mean, I know I can sound like I know something about it, but I'm not that expert. But I knew who to work with, and I knew how to listen. I knew how to integrate the pieces together. But when somebody like Common Sense Media gives you 9 stars out of 10 for quality and educational value, when the Joan Gans Cooney Center that owns Sesame Street publishes your white paper on learning and praises the game, when the Center for Education Reform talks about it very positively. that's the kind of stuff where when the professionals weighed in and say, yeah, we've looked at this, and this really does make sense, this really should work. Yeah?
When you're talking about growing an industry or scaling change, was there a strategic reason why you set up as a nonprofit instead of a for-profit?
Actually, we are a for-profit. The question is, why would you be a for-profit or a nonprofit? Honestly, simple answer, I've spent my whole career raising venture money and doing for-profit things. That's all I know how to do. So it was actually really not an option to do the other because I wouldn't have had any idea how to do it. There are certain complexities also about nonprofits, and it's just confusing and complicated, and you kind of have to be one or the other. So I'm not really trying to say that one is necessarily better. I think it really depends on your background and who's in your network and what kind of influence that you have.
So maybe one more question.
One more question.
What ages do you feel that this can start with?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because if you think about math, kids start learning math in first grade and they're counting on their fingers, and then later they get to algebra, later they get to calculus, and you can be a lifelong student of math. And everybody knows that and recognizes the value and importance of that. The serious professionals around SEL feel the same way. So they would tell you that, yeah, if I got a first grader, we're going to count on our fingers. We're going to learn about what an emotion is. We're going to learn about how feelings can get escalated and how you can calm down. Okay, years later, the algebra equivalent is when you're probably really going to understand sensitivity about differences and start to understand empathy. The calculus is compassion, where you are really able to feel someone's suffering, suffer with them, and act on it, and make ethical choices. I mean, if you try to go teach a first grader to be ethical, yeah, good luck. So you can introduce some of these ideas, but you better not think they're really going to learn it and own it for a period of years. I mean, just true confession. As part of the domain analysis, I read 300 books to get prepared. I want to know, well, what does everybody say about every one of these topics? If they've got anything to say, I want to know what they said. And then I started boiling it down to this list that we had to come up with the 20 teaching goals, and I thought to myself, do I really understand that? No, not yet. Do I understand? Yeah, that one I understand. When did I understand that? And I realized that there was one of the 20 that I'd understood since childhood. There were 3 of them that I figured out as a younger adult. The other 16, I didn't really understand until the last 2 years. This is the thing about awareness, is that until you've really brought this stuff into a valid awareness, you won't even be humble enough to admit how deficient we all are. At least that was my experience. So anyway, I think I completely missed your question. What was it?
Your learning program start with
Yeah, okay, so basically we spread it out, but there's a recognition that if you do a year of stuff, you're going to cover a lot of stuff, and then in the second year, you're going to repeat some of it. Just like in math, we're going to do the math tables, for a period of years. And then you're just adding depth and complexity and introducing bigger topics. For example, in middle schools, one of the things they do that's a very profound thing is this sort of group collaborative process that involves kind of principles of intervention and mediation. And it's much more profound in middle school when you're dealing with middle school issues. And you can bring some of those principles back down to younger kids, but a lot of that would just fly over their head. So we'll do things like the concept of assertive voice with a younger kid. We'll introduce ideas around conflict resolution and collaboration, but clearly it's going to take some years of progression to more sophisticated things. Like this thing in middle school, a lot of people call it open session. It's very sophisticated. We wouldn't try to do that in the first year of curriculum. On the other hand, that first year of curriculum, I think a lot of schools, a lot of kids, or even a lot of adults, even if they replayed that first year every year, they get a lot of benefit out of it, just like it's not a bad idea to see the Wizard of Oz every year. Okay, thanks very much.